In this video, we're going to walk through the Microsoft Learn Lab, Secure Your Azure Virtual Machine Disks. Now, security within the cloud is always a big concern, and definitely for some people are more concerned about security than others, and therefore you may not just want a secure cloud environment, but you may want the machines running in the cloud to be encrypted as well. So this lab is going to walk through how we can encrypt not just the OS disk, but the OS and the data disks inside all of our virtual machines. Let's go ahead and walk through the introduction. Here we have a scenario where you are working for a warehouse company that's moving to the cloud. Currently you're using lots of virtual machines, but you want to move them up into Azure, and you have a security policy that mandates all of your machines must be encrypted using your own encryption keys. So meaning keys that you manage and nobody else, even Azure, can't get past. You currently use PowerShell on-premise, so you are fairly familiar with how to use PowerShell, and you want to use the disk encryption options in order to encrypt your hard drives. Now, when we're encrypting virtual machines, there are two different types of virtual machines, both Windows or Linux, and how we encrypt those depends on which operating system we're running. A little bit of background, what's encrypted? Basically, hiding data so that nobody else can read it. And then how do we hide that? Well, we use what's called a key, an encryption key, in order to both encrypt or decrypt the data. And with Azure, there are two different types of encryption. First off, there is what's called the storage service encryption, which basically is performed on the physical disks at the data center. So this is built into Azure, and it encrypts all the data that is in Azure, whether this is on a virtual machine or whether this is just regular data that's stored out in Azure. Everything will be encrypted by default on the disks in Azure. The other option is what's called Azure Disk Encryption, which encrypts virtual hard drives and is actually part of the operating system inside of your VM. With Azure Disk Encryption, there are two different technologies. If you're running Windows, we use BitLocker in order to encrypt the data. If you're using Linux, it uses dmcrypt. Now, there are other full disk encryption technologies you could use on these virtual machines. You would have to do that outside of the Azure managed environment, which means the cool management tools we're going to be using here won't work, but it's very secure and very easy to set up. So in order to set this up, well, there's three different steps. First off, since we want to use our own keys, we have to set up a key vault. Once we're done setting up the key vault, well, then we have to specify that it can be used for disk encryption. And then lastly is to set the keys into the key vault. It has some examples right here of how to set that up. For instance, if we wanted to create a new key vault, there is an example, as well as the PowerShell options is there. We can also do this through the Azure Portal. It is just simply a key vault. And then you can specify the key policies through it. So let's go ahead and a few more options: specifying how to encrypt the hard drive, viewing the status of the hard drive, decrypting the hard drive. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this and see how it works. So I've just started up a Cloud Shell, or started up a sandbox here. Cloud Shell is logging in. And first thing we're going to do is deploy a virtual machine. So first off, we're going to get a location. So we're going to figure out what our current location is, and then assign that into a variable. Once that's done, we're going to create some more additional variables and then create a virtual machine. There we go. So first off is we set our location. We then set a couple other variables. The first one called VM name, and then the resource group. So we're going to create a VM called FM data. And then lastly, to create a new virtual machine, enter username and password. I'm just going to call this test admin and my super secret password 01. That's not going to work. That's not a long enough password. Maybe it will work. Okay. All right, so that's going ahead and create. Very briefly, we look through these. $sign location, that sets the value for a variable. Specifically is to get the resource group. So get AZ resource group gets the resource group out of Azure, that specific resource group, and then gets its location, saves that into the location variable. VM name, RG name, and then create a new AZ VM, new Azure virtual machine, in that resource group, named that in that location, with 3389 or RDP open to the world. I'm not entirely convinced that that deployed, so I'm actually going to open up the Azure portal just because I didn't type a long password. And there are restrictions with the passwords that you type in. That seems to have taken it. Okay. Yep, we can go ahead and paste that in. What this does is it creates a reference to the virtual machine. So now if I do just like $VM, we'll see all the same details. Additionally, we can look into the specific OS disk. So this is the VM, which we just created. We look at the storage profile specifically for the OS disk or the C drive. Tells us that this is Windows. Here is the name of it, which we could also see through the web GUI. Let's see, we could see that this is 127 gigabytes and it is a managed disk. And then we can run get AZ VM disk encryption status to look for that same VM and get the encryption status of that virtual machine. And we will see the OS volume is not encrypted and the data volume is not encrypted. Again, we could see the same information here if we go up to the virtual machine in the Azure cloud. It does show it in here. Azure disk encryption not enabled. Okay, so we created a virtual machine. We confirmed that it is not encrypted. Now let's go ahead and encrypt it. So again, we need to create the key vault, set the key vault to support disk encryption, and then tell Azure to encrypt our drive. So first thing we need to do for creating the key vault is to create a virtual, we'll create the key vault name. We'll go with a simple name there. And then we will use the new AZ key vault command to create the key vault in Azure. Already in use. Okay, so it didn't like my default name here, so I'm going to hit the up arrow key a couple of times. And let's go ahead and I'll put my initials in there. That ought to work. And then rerun that new AZ key vault command. So this is creating the key vault. If we wish, we could actually come back here under all resources in the portal, and we will see a key vault show up here in the type. It may take a couple of seconds for it to show up. Yeah. And of course, it's still creating it. All right, and so now we want to get a variable in order to point to the key vault information. So for instance, if I do a get-az key vault, will that give me all of them? Yes, it gives me the one. So I want to store that into a variable called key vault so I can reference it shortly. And then we're going to do the set AZ VM disk encryption extension. So this is the command that will actually go into the virtual machine and tell it to enable disk encryption. It says, hey, are you sure you want to do this? This may cause the machine to reboot, and have you backed it up? I'm going to say yes. I can just go ahead and hit enter. It says the default is Y, so if I hit enter, it will accept yes. And it starts the disk encryption of the machine. This can take a couple of minutes. It says it could take between 10 and 15 minutes. While that's happening, we could, in theory, come back into the virtual machine. Let's see, first off, let's find the key vault here. Right there, there's my key vault. And my keys, none currently. Oh, I'm not authorized, never mind. Otherwise, if we look back at our virtual machine, it will probably take a few minutes for it to tell us if the disk encryption is enabled. So we will have to wait while that runs. All right, so that took a couple of minutes and then finally finished up. We can see here the is success status code is now true. And now if I go back to the web portal, previously it was set to not enabled. If I refresh, ooh, that may take a couple of minutes for the refresh to work, but it will eventually show. There we go. Azure Disk Encryption is now enabled. So now the hard drive is fully encrypted. And even if the virtual hard disk is stolen from me, nobody can access it because they don't have access to that key vault to decrypt the drives. All right, continue. Oh, actually on the prior page, it did mention at the very end there, new disks added after the encryption will not automatically be encrypted. We would have to rerun this command in order to add additional encryption to those new disks. So for that machine that we were just looking at, if I added a new data disk, that would not be automatically encrypted with these new keys. All right. So we can actually automate these configurations. For instance, we can use ARM templates or Azure Resource Manager templates in order to have these configured automatically. There are lots of examples of ARM templates out there. For instance, on the Azure webpage, there are some ARM templates there. There are also quite a few examples out on the Azure Quick Start templates that are ARM templates that we can download and install. And then we talk about how we can actually start running these. And we'll actually be doing that in the next page here. All right, so we manually encrypted the drives. Now let's use an ARM template in order to decrypt the drive. Now, we're doing the decryption here, but if we wanted this to be set across all of our machines, if we wanted to encrypt all of our machines, we could use a similar ARM template to encrypt them all, as opposed to manually typing it via the Azure CLI or via PowerShell. So we're going to go into the Azure Portal. So come back here to the Azure Portal, and I'm going to create a new resource. And in this case, I'm specifically looking for a template. And I want to choose a custom, template deployment using a custom template. And create. Now under the select template here, I can choose to create my own. I can look at some of these common templates, or I can choose a quick start template. So under quick start, I'm going to choose 201. Is that correct? 201. 201 decrypt. Decrypt running Windows VM without AAD. There we go. Now that I have that selected, I can go ahead and say select template. Then asks me for various information. Again, resource group, my VM name. In this case, I'll call it FM data -VM01. Volume type of all, this could be OS as opposed to data. And then review and create. Hold on, did I get everything there? Right, select template, basics. And create. Previously, that button actually said purchase, even though there was no purchase to be made. All right, so at this point, what it's doing is it's actually looking at that template, and the template says, well, decrypt all the data. Specifically for that machine, FM data VM01. So this is going ahead and it is deploying that template to my environment. Let's go ahead and open up a new tab here and see if I can get into the virtual machines. Currently still says Azure Disk Encryption is enabled, but as this template deploys, then that will be changed to not enabled. All right, and the deployment was complete. At this point, we should be able to look back at our virtual machine. Before I refresh it, it says Azure Disk Encryption is enabled. Now, when I refresh the page, we should then be able to look at the disk encryption status, and the template should set it to not enabled. So there you go. It was that quick and easy in order to encrypt the data on our virtual machines. Now, we did just one simple OS virtual disk at this point, but the same process would have occurred. It would have been the same process if we wanted to encrypt multiple hard drives on this virtual machine, including multiple drive data disks, as well as encrypting multiple different virtual machines throughout our environment.